In this video, you're going to learn how to become a great strategic thinker in 2024. I made this video last year, 2023, but I want to make it this year again. I think there's a few things going on this year that are building up on what happened last year. And we have to really think about strategic thinking in a modern way. We have to see what's going on and adjust accordingly. Now, I work with over 90 organizations, helping them think about strategy, helping them create the future. And of course, the right kind of thinking, the strategic thinking, is critical in all of this. Now, I want to show you some of the things I learned from all this work and that you can apply in your individual life and your professional life. Now, stick around to really understand how strategic thinking is changing, how it's going forward, and what you can do to keep up with the times. Now, let's look at the world in 2024. There's things that kind of feel new, but I really think they are really all things that are slightly different today. For example, the first thing that we see today is uncertainty. We hear it all the time. The world's uncertain. How do you deal with uncertainty? You get stressed out if the world's uncertain, right? It on and on and on. But I really think uncertainty has actually always been around. It was around, you imagine 1930s as the world is ramping up to go to war. It's around before in the Great Depression. So uncertainty, I think, has always been part of the human condition. What we have today is an amplification of the uncertainty. Now, maybe the way we consume content, the way we consume news or media, or our connectedness from our technology, maybe all the factors. There's likely not a single thing, but the uncertainty feels amplified. You feel everything. There's a local conflict in the world, and you feel it much more closely. Maybe it's the video, and it makes it much more real. Or you see friends talk about it on social media within minutes of seeing it. So there's this amplification of uncertainty. The second thing is an increase in shallow thinking. And same thing, I don't think, if we look at previous generations, they were sort of golden eras of critical thinking and deep thinking. I think society has always been split in many different ways. Concepts like propaganda, even if you take something like fake news, I think has always been around in some shape or form. But it may also be the same factors, the technology, social media, and content that are making the thinking a little bit more shallow. An example for you, if you take something like climate change, right? Highly politicized, controversial. Once you dive into the science, you start to see the nuance of the situation. What is happening, what are the pragmatic ways of dealing with it, what are the ways that can be quite damaging for anything else that's not climate. And you can come up with a reasonable take on it. But a lot of the conversation is really happening at a very superficial level of thinking. So something to keep in mind. Number 3 is a sense of overwhelm. Again, so many things going on. We may feel we don't have enough time in our days, whether it's work or personal. Something seems to be consuming our days, right? I've seen knowledge workers in particular. They seem to work a lot, but they also don't seem to accomplish as much. It seems to be a lot of small bits and pieces in how they work. So the work itself may be not as adequate, but nonetheless, there's a sense of overwhelm. And lastly, we're also seeing a lack of basic skills. Right? Some of the education systems are not delivering enough basic skills around math, of course, critical thinking, as we saw before, conversation, dealing with emotions, and so on. Right? So all these things is really what we see today in the world in 2024. Amplified uncertainty, increasingly shallow thinking, sense of overwhelm, and a lack of basic skills that organizations have to deal with in some shape or form. So that's where we're at when we start to think about how to become a great strategic thinker. Now, fundamental principles I want for you to think about. We'll talk about strategies next, but the principles before that. First, you really want to aim for deep roots. So it may be cool to have an opinion on everything, but it's much more useful to be able to go deeper into an issue, right? Take something like climate again. If you were to read the 4 or 5 major books, maybe some of the major papers, you spend a few months doing that, you can have a pretty nuanced position on climate change. You may not be an expert, but you have some depth to it, right? It's not as shallow as it is. So whatever your work is, whatever your field is, that's where you're trying to aim, right? When I work with organizations, I typically look for those individuals who have a deep understanding of their world, and from there they can sort of build upon it. It's much easier to build on our strategic thinking. The second thing is about being able to control your time. With executives, the number one thing that they need help with is trying to carve out time to actually go through that strategic thinking. right? Their days are packed with tasks and meetings, and there's no time to just think. And I'm not saying, 5 hours here and there. I'm saying, can you find 30 minutes in the morning, and can you find 45 minutes to go for a walk and be able to think through what's going on? And this is a lack of control of your time. Now, there's many productivity systems out there. I'm not here to recommend one. You just have to find a way to carve out the time as needed. Number 3 is natural abilities. There's an institute called the Johnson O'Connor, and they test your different aptitudes, the things that you tend to do naturally. So this is something to do that's actually very useful. You may be aware of what are some of your natural abilities, the things that you do well, the things that feel easy to you, and you want to leverage them as much as possible, right? So you might see me do some visual designs here as I explain ideas. This is one of the things I enjoy doing. Now, you may not be visual, that's completely fine, but you may be able to explain it really well. So you just lean into those natural abilities. Questions over answers. When it comes to strategic thinking, it's really about having great questions, not having the answers. Now, you may contribute to the answers, you may do the thinking with them, as I do with many of my clients, but it really starts with a great question, right? And you want to listen for the opportunities to slide in those questions. Quick break before we go on to the next section. If you want help with strategy, if you want to look at the strategic thinking in more detail and how I can help your organization do that, get in touch, right? Look at my strategy page, rubenjagarta.com/strategy. You can learn how I approach strategy and how you can do this. And for that, I'm going to move to the iPad here. 3 strategies that I want to show you here for actually how to go through the strategic thinking itself. Now, the first one, let me show this here. We're going to call this what if. One of the things that comes up often in strategy is we find shifts that are going on in the industry, and we imagine what if, right? What if this goes on and gets more commonplace? So let's take something like AI, right? And then we might say, what if AI becomes completely dominant? What does that mean, right? And all of a sudden there's things along the way, right? We might need to change our staff. We might need new technology, and so on and so on. So we imagine this what if, and then we start to say, okay, well, maybe we don't need to change our entire staff, but maybe there's something we can do here that makes sense now, or we don't need our entire tech, but there's some tech we can find. So we start to find different ways of how to think about the future and how we can respond to it, and how explore scenarios. Maybe there's a scenario where AI becomes dominant, one where it becomes helpful but not dominant, and one where nothing happens. How do we respond to each one, right? Start to explore the different branches of possibility. Second thing is why. Very classic. Toyota famously invented or came up with the idea of asking 5 whys to get to the root cause of issues. But it's the same idea. Whenever anything comes up, why? So an organization might say to me, if we keep the same example, we need to do something about AI, right? The next logical question is why? Because we're afraid we'll be left behind. What does that mean, right? Why? As much as possible, what we're trying to do here at the end of the day is have clear language, right? Clear language where we can say, this is why this matters. And if we can't get that, then we can ignore it, right? If there's not a good reason to be focused on AI, why go through it, right? It's not for everyone. It's not for every organization. We want to find it, and we can only do that by looking at the why. And I think the last thing is any kind of visual thinking, if that's something that's in your toolbox. You can see here, right? This is an example of visual thinking. I often, I was once in a session, and they were talking about how there were some team members who were really capable and some who weren't, right? So all of a sudden we thought, okay, you have team members here, right, who are really good, and then you have team members here who are not as good. So how do we close this gap, right? What do we need to do? And then we can start to say, okay, well, to close this gap, what we need is, sales skills. We need follow through. We need accountability, and so on, right? So this is just an example of visual thinking. We take a problem of how do we get a low performance staff to a higher level, and we can put it in some kind of visual format. It's okay, well, low performance staff are here, high performance staff are here. What's the gap? What are the skills in that gap? What do we call those skills? How can we start working on those? So 3 ways to really start to think about strategic thinking in your work. That's everything I have for today. My name is Ruben Garta. I'm an expert in strategic decisions. We covered today's strategic thinking, so it's highly related. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. Several things for you in the description box. First, if you'd like more help, be sure to check out my website. There's a contact form besides the actual speaking form or speaking page I mentioned earlier. There's also a link to my newsletter on Substack. The Growth Needle goes out every Tuesday and has similar ideas, so make sure to check that out. And finally, in the comment section below, let me know, what are you doing this year to become a better strategic thinker?